Hi everyone, it's Catherine or Mrs. Cronall, and I'm back with the lovely Clare Gray for our A Clash of Kings reread. We are looking at the prologue all the way to the end of Bran 1 today. I see Sunny has a question in the chat. Hi Sunny, thank you for joining us. Happy New Year. And I will get to that question pretty soon. I just have a couple of things that I have to do a shout out for, which I forgot to tell you, Claire. But anyway, I have to give a shout out to my brother and his wonderful wife for getting me these towels for Christmas.
Oh, brilliant.
When I'm sweating buckets because of the oracle's, theories, I can just mop my brow as we go. The other thing was this amazing book from our House Polished partner in crime, Lisa Hendy. Lisa, thank you so much. We had great fun with that over Christmas. But look at this, guys. This wonderful lady here made this dragon's egg for me. I haven't seen a red comet in the sky of Zurich yet, but I am hoping to hatch this some stage during our reread. So thank you so much, Claire. I absolutely love it. I have a little stat there now and everything for it. So welcome, everybody. Just to let you know that for next week, we will be reading all the way up to the end of Davos 1, which is the end of chapter 10. But we'll remind you of that at the end of the discussion as well. So Claire, do you have anything you want to say? And you have a few thoughts on A Clash of Kings in general, right?
Yeah, so just this 2018 marks the 20th anniversary of the publication of Clash of Kings. So it was published in 1998, which made me think about some of the things that I was doing in 1998, and then that was quite scary. But 20 years ago, yeah, so that was quite interesting. Obviously, in this book, we've got the introduction of some new point of view characters, namely Davos and Theon. The Theon we've been aware of in the story, but now we're starting to get an actual point of view from Theon, and a new character, Davos, who obviously illuminates the whole story around Stannis as we go forward. So that's really exciting. And I think just reading the first few chapters, the prologue and the first 4 chapters, for me, my approach to reading this book is different to previous rereads. I think I'm really appreciating the kind of technical aspect of the writing this time. So the mechanics behind the world building and like scoping out the story arcs and that kind of aspect of it I'm really enjoying, because I can see how it's all going to be fitting together. Obviously, we've got the hindsight of having read the books previously, so this is a reread for us. I think it also makes me realise that although we're seeing this world building and it's a really good mechanism for Martin to develop the stories, as many as they are in the characters, we have to bear in mind that the way that it's written through point of view, again, and I've said this before, this is where the intrigue and the theories come from, because it's a potentially very, very narrow point of view. So what the point of view character observes in that chapter around them and what the assumptions they come up with wouldn't necessarily be what you would observe or what I would observe if we were in that scenario. So it just made me kind of reflect on that. And, you know, we all pick up different things from reading these books and the whole series. But again, it just made me appreciate how it's been written and why it's so popular, and there are lots of fans of these books. But yeah, what do you think?
Sorry, I was really intrigued by what you said there, because it is, I do think about that a lot. Like, how would a chapter look from somebody else's point of view, especially the prologue? Although I feel like with Maester Cressen's prologue, which we're going to get into, I think now, with the benefit of hindsight, having read the other books in the series, I kind of think I'd know what Mel would think in that situation. I'd know what Davos would think in that situation. But the big question, which kind of leads into Sonny Frank's question as well, hi AU to you too, is what is Stannis thinking the entire time? And that's always my big thing, is like, what are the silent royal characters thinking? Like Rob and Stannis and all that kind of thing. But that's so interesting. That's 20 years. That's amazing. I was 15. There you go. So God knows what I was doing. So yeah, I think. Do you want to hit the prologue first, or this? By the way, we were just talking about this. The longest prologue. It has to be. I don't think there is a longer prologue than this. I certainly don't remember a longer prologue than this. I kind of forgot how long this prologue is. If you're listening to the audiobooks, I think it's around an hour and 15 minutes or something. And I think it's about 27, 26 pages in the book. So it's quite a sizable prologue. And it is written by a old man. And it sounds like, and especially I have a greater appreciation reading A Clash of Kings, how great George R. R. Martin is at moving from the mind of an 80-year-old man to the mind of an 9-year-old girl. Like, it's seamless, and he owns it. I mean, the contrast between the meandering thoughts of Cresson with Bran howling like a wolf later on.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, and this is why it takes him so long to finish these books. It can't be easy transitioning from one to the other. I don't know if you know how he does that, what his process is. Does he write all of one character first and then go like all the POVs for one character? I'm not sure, but
don't know.
He's a master at that. I suppose we could start with Sonny's question, who asks, do we know how Melisandre came to be connected with Selyse? Stannis has been in King's Landing, so when did he decide to side with Melisandre?
Well, I don't know if Melisandre seems to have been sent there on a mission to convert Stannis into some sort of prophet of the Red God. Now, whether or not it was Stannis specifically, or whether it was just whoever was going to be on the throne, and she decided that he was the true king and needed to be on the throne. But again, I don't want to refer too much to the TV series, but in the TV series, she flips her allegiances quite quickly to Jon from Stannis. So I'm not entirely sure completely understand what her motivations are.
No.
Or whether or not, clearly Selyse is more adaptable to Melisandre's influence than Stannis. However, in this chapter, I found it quite interesting that Stannis does seem to listen to Selyse and Melisandre. Then they do seem to kind of move around together. Selyse is like clamped to Melisandre's side, and he does seem to listen to them. Even to Selyse's suggestion about killing Renly, his own brother.
Yeah.
But where they actually, in terms of the question, where they became connected and where Mel became connected with Selyse, I'm not entirely sure.
Certainly the Red priests and priestesses tend to show up. I don't know if they're necessarily always called for. So yeah, they tend to show. The question I have here is, why is there a maester there? And why is there a maester anywhere? Like, these maesters seem to have their hooks in everywhere. And it's interesting that we're actually starting with the prologue today and ending with Bran 4, because they're both very maester-centric in terms of the influence that the maester in both situations try to have. And Cresson is already, his replacement is already there. Pylos, is that his name? But I'm still none the wiser as to the role of maesters, how willing families are to have them there. I guess it's handy to have a doctor around, a doctor around. But yeah, I think she probably just showed up, like you were saying. I think she probably was on a mission. Like Mel, it could be that Stannis is a means to an end. But I don't know. I mean, the whole sword thing later on is a bit weird.
Yeah, John A.U. Packmule is saying that Melisandre is just like Thoros, who was supposed to convert Robert. I mean, he didn't do a great job. He just ended up converting him into an alcoholic, I think. But
they seem to be where they're needed, I guess. And certainly, I don't know, with Stannis, it's hard to know throughout the series whether Mel is actually a hindrance or a help sometimes with Stannis. But yeah, we get introduced to the Onion Knight. I'm not going to flash my chest, I promise. I've got my Onion Knight t-shirt on. Of course, we're introduced to Davos, Shireen, Patchface, Selyse, Melisandre, and of course, Stannis. That's the big one. But we also got a lot of information on Renly. And I think the thing that really jumped out at me at the very beginning of this is the emphasis on the color red throughout this. And even red kind of features all the way into Tyrion's chapter as well as a color. Not just the comet, but like banners, blood. Obviously, Melisandre is a red priestess. So the idea of red is something that kind of it's definitely drawing your attention, red flag, drawing your attention to the fact that a Game of Thrones started with ice, and we seem to be starting with fire here, and there's a bigger emphasis, I think, on fire going in from the prologue. And I was kind of thinking about Game of Thrones and the POVs that instantly stick out when I think of a Game of Thrones is Ned, Dany, Cat, Jon. Like, they're definitely pivotal in making up that book. Obviously, Arya and Tyrion have important roles as well, but those four are they're the pivotal ones in a Game of Thrones. And yet here we start Arya, Sansa, Tyrion, Bran. So it's already a very different kind of makeup. Bran is obviously the first chapter in a Game of Thrones as well, but he's not really that central as much as he will be in this book, I think, apart from Jaime in the Tower. But we'll get to Bran. But yeah, it already feels like a very different book, and we're getting the other side of the song, I think.
It's interesting you say that about the sorry, carry on.
Go ahead. No.
When you're referencing this feeling of red and fire, because obviously we get the comet. The comet features in every single one of these first 5 chapters, and it's also referenced in some kind of way from each of these chapters as blood and fire and dragon. The only people throughout all of these 5 chapters that don't refer to the comet as being blood, fire, dragon, i.e. to me that means like Targaryen dragon, are Joffrey, because obviously of his own sense of self-importance, it's King Joffrey's comet. And even though the small folk are saying something different, and the servants at the Red Keep are saying something different, and Gendry but Gendry again refers to it, I think, as the red sword. So it's still this kind of feeling of red, and even with Joffrey as well, and the Lannister colours, there's this real feature of red tying to the. I just like the fact that this entity. It features in each of these 5 chapters, and some of them are very similar, but again there's a very visceral response from whoever is describing what that comet means to them. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
And it is I know my husband loves talking about the idea of the comet, and I know we've said we must do just a discussion on like the astronomical forces and all that kind of thing. It is hard to know if the birth of the dragons at the end of that Game of Thrones, where we see the red comet for the first time, is the reason why we're seeing the red comet, or if it's just one of those things, and everybody's interpreting it like the flood, like the story of the flood or something.
Yeah,
everybody's interpreting what it means to them. But
but it's also again reminiscent of the whole the kind of story and legend of Azor Ahai. Each culture, if you think about the world of Ice and Fire, each culture and each area of the map has a different interpretation of what I think I've personally referred to Azor Ahai as Santa Claus before, because it does seem to be this he's called a slightly different name in different areas of the world, and he appears at different, there's slightly different cultural references, but it's the same character, it's the same event,
kind of Bran potentially, like
yeah.
No, I will get into Patchface in a second with you. But there's a couple of things with the Maester Crescent before we start off, apart from the Grand Maester conspiracy, which I think we'll probably explore a bit more as we go through this book. But he's having a lot of nightmares and dreams, particularly about Mel. And I wonder, is that just because he's obsessing over her, or is she in some way influencing his dreams somehow with some sort of magic? I don't know. We also have Shireen having a dream here that she's eaten by a dragon, which I thought was a bit strange, because most of the children that you meet in the series find dragons fascinating and exciting, and they're thrilled by them, but Shireen is genuinely afraid. So that's a different idea of dragons coming in, and I wonder, does that have some kind of foreshadowing potentially to Stannis or her, like a Targaryen eating the Baratheon, kind of symbolically, potentially. I'm not even sure. But,
I think if I was 10 years old and half of my face felt like dragon scale, like I felt, like basically, I think I probably would have quite scary dreams about dragons as well.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Because there's the theory that grayscale is somehow. There's all sorts of wild theories. I think Stuart once said years ago, grayscale. It seems like maybe it was some kind of like weird genetic experiment between humans and dragons, and this disease was a kind of byproduct of that, and this is what the grayscale thing is. So maybe it is somehow related to.
I think you mentioned that with Dany's baby when it was born with a tail, like it would almost look like a dragon, or there was dragon-esque features.
Yeah, I mean, I have to, again, World of Ice and Fire. I have got that book, but I just use it as a kind of, like, it's more like a coffee table sort of thing. I haven't read it cover to cover.
I just dip in and out. I need to sit down and read it.
But there are some really horrible, like, but just from what I've heard other people say, like awful areas and places, like in history and legends, where it's like, cross breeding, and I think the Valerians maybe tried something weird like that. But I mean, it came from somewhere. But I think this is possible. That potentially could be another reason why Shireen has quite horrific dragon dreams.
Really horrific, and I think it's. I think it shouldn't be underestimated, the importance of that disease, the potential of the importance of that disease to the book. To the series, especially later on with John Connington. But we start, I think at some stage very early in the prologue, the Maester refers to the comet as being like a wound in the sky, and then we get this description of Shireen and her disease, and then a lot of this prologue is driven by the fact, and then obviously we have Patchface who's mentally, psychologically wounded. But then a lot of this prologue is driven by the emotional wound that Stannis is inflicting upon this man, who, the most heartbreaking speech, which I completely forgot about, but you who were the most unloved and needed my love the most, or something like that, you know, and it's just like, oh my God, it's like
such a sad,
so heartbreaking.
The whole prologue was, I finished the the prologue and just felt so bereft. It was just such a sad. Aside from the fact that it's a very long, sprawling chapter, we've said that already. It's, I think, the longest chapter so far, certainly longer than any of the Game of Thrones chapters. Yeah. And it's just so sad, but it's also very grim and gothic and creepy. And there's this harsh environment that's kind of conjured up and described as the whole, you know, the whole of Dragonstone. I thought it was quite interesting that Meister Cresson described Dragonstone as what did he describes it as a smoking rock in the great salt sea, which immediately just, you know, the prophecy of Azor Ahai born amidst salt and smoke. Yeah, so it just very sad, very, very sad.
And to her credit, even at the end, when he's going to try and kill Nell, she says, "Are you sure you want to do this?"
Yeah,
like you could tip out that wine. Like everybody knows how. Like even though she tries to crown him with Patchface's helm and just make a fool out of him, like he's being bullied. He's
still loyal to Stannis. He loves him, even though
he shouldn't.
Even with the fool's helm on his head, it's just heartbreaking. A heartbreaking chapter. I'd forgotten how sad it was.
So has the Citadel sent this new kind of maester in training because maybe they feel Cresson has become too involved, that he's now too loyal to Stannis over perhaps his chain, because it's like it doesn't. He finds the chain heavy. He doesn't. He's not being respected as a maester. But what's hurting him most is the fact that he's not being respected as this kind of surrogate dad that he really felt he was to Stannis.
But he also feels as though it's the feeling that he's got that he's let them down. He's let all three of them down, all three brothers, and that he could have done better. So that's the feeling of sadness that I get, is the regret
his fault,
that he has.
That maybe he feels like he didn't bring them together enough.
But I mean, what could it, in terms of like asserting his authority? I mean, the thing is that he was the male role model, influence, whatever, in the absence of their father and the parents who died in this horrific drowning when they were children. And there seems to be, what I got from this chapter for the Baratheon brothers, the Baratheon boys, a lot of sibling rivalry. So so there were each of them obviously very different, and I don't need to describe them. Each of them were very different. But the fact that I'd forgotten that Stannis was so jealous of Ned and Robert's attention towards Ned, jealous and bitter. I mean, you know that, or I remember, well, yes, I understand why Stannis is so bitter about Renly, because Renly was given Storm's End. That's their ancestral home. Robert just kind of gave him Dragonstone to kind of babysit, and he felt hard done by, and you can understand that. But just the description of them as boys, and Renly with the look at me, look at me, look at me, I'm a king. And actually, this sibling rivalry, how far did it go? How far is it carrying on into adulthood, where actually all three of these boys ended up being kings? All three of them.
Yeah.
So that's where they pushed it to that limit, where they all had to be a king.
And there's a lot, I feel like, with Renly, again, this kind of comes up in Bran's chapter, the idea that the youngest feels ignored or needs more attention. Which we'll get in Rick on, which is a complete other extreme to Renly.
Yeah.
But it is like Stannis is definitely caught in between, and yet he's probably the most intelligent. You know, he's definitely the most intelligent. He's got the best grammar for sure. And he is potentially the best leader, and yet I mean, all through Game of Thrones, we're waiting to meet this guy. And I guess the question I have for you is this a good introduction to Stannis? Is this like the best way to meet him? I don't think it is either, because suddenly, well, you meet Shireen, who's sweet. You meet Patchface, which is kind of weird, and we'll talk about Patchface, I guess, in a minute. And then you meet Selyse, who's like mental. And then Melisandre, who's just downright evil. The first time we see her, one of the first things she suggests is fratricide. Like, I mean,
yeah.
And then we meet Davos, who's amazing, obviously, but also missing fingers because that's Stannis's form of justice. So it isn't the way we should be seeing Stannis. And I know I loved Stannis all the way through. And I know there are hardcore Stannis should be king fans out there. But judging by this prologue, you're like, I don't know about that.
Me too.
This is the guy that loves him the most in the world. And we are getting this view of Stannis, this guy who's easily had his head turned, whose sense of justice seems extreme, whose daughter seems to be completely cut off from the world and just
neglect.
This mad gesture. Yeah.
Complete neglect. Yeah.
So
I think
also like cuts off Ned, who was like our hero in the last book.
From pure motivated by pure jealousy, and again going back to this sense of extreme sibling rivalry between the three of them that no parents would have been able to control. And Cresson was there, but he's a Maester. He's not a parent. There's a difference between being a male father figure and being the parent, where you can actually go, whoa, hang on a minute, let's get these three boys into check here, because this just is too extreme. I think it's, for me, again, you're absolutely right, Catherine, where you're talking about Stannis's head being turned. That threw me through a loop in this chapter, because I've always had this impression of Stannis of having this iron will, and he'll break before he bends, all that kind of. But actually, he considers Cresson's suggestion of Serene going to the Eyrie, even though Selyse will have nothing to do with that. He then listens to Selyse and Mel and talking about the comet being him being the true god, and that's another one where it wasn't about blood and fire. Selyse suggesting that it was about him being, basically the red god, or linked to the red god, and suggesting killing Renly. He listens to all of them, but I just think it was, as I was reading the chapter, and whoever it was, Selyse suggests that the Maester should put the fool's helm and the antlers and bells and everything back on again. And I thought, oh, this is going to be the bit where Stannis says, no, this is enough. This is like things are being taken too far. And he doesn't. He colludes with them, and it was a real blow to my kind of sense of as a big Stannis fan. I became a huge Stannis fan when he turns up at the Wall. I was like, yes, I love this guy. This is great. Exactly. But this made me very disappointed with Stannis. But again, going back to what I said earlier, I've always now got to think this is through the narrow point of view of a very sad, older Maester who feels that he hasn't fulfilled properly this role of this father figure. All of this chapter is heartbreaking, all of it.
So like what exactly? So like what if we had somebody with Dany, for instance? We got a prologue with Dany later on in her life, where she has her head easily turned by certain people in her life. And yet we're going to expect Dany to show up and save the day at certain points. But how would we feel about Dany from the outside? Probably not very good. The fact that we have her, what she's thinking all the time, and we see her growth changes us. It changes our opinion of her. Yeah. Had we seen, I guess, what Stannis had gone through, I mean, he watched his parents die. He had a brother who was basically an arsehole. Let's be fair. Robert Baratheon is an arsehole. And also, like, sleeps with somebody. We'll find out later on, or maybe we found out in the last book. He sleeps with somebody in Stannis's marriage bed. Isn't that right?
Yes,
Edric
and
Storm. Is that Edric Storm?
Yeah, that's Edric Storm. Yeah, the privileged royal bastard. Yeah.
So, I mean, just nasty. And then you've got Renly, who sounds like a complete pain in the arse. So,
the very, very elaborate way of kind of outing him, I thought, in this chapter.
The Rainbow Guard.
And the very kind of elaborate sort of, you know, he was always
unless he's
kind
writing
of
to the CAA.
Yeah. Yeah, Code Rainbow. Yeah.
But yeah, no, Renly is funny. I'm trying to. There's just when Maester Crescent says to Melisandre or Stannis, he says, "Gods make uncertain allies," which I thought is interesting. Which is, the theory that I want to talk to you about later on is going to play into that a little bit. And the last thing that I had to say about this was Patchface. Yeah. Is everything that Patchface says, is it all nonsense, or is there anything we can take from it? So, like, I made a list of all the things that he says. Under the sea, it's always summer. Under the sea, things fall up. The birds have scales for feathers. The fish eat us. No one wears hats.
Yeah.
Is it all nonsense?
Patchface is creepy as shit. And he I will saying this right now, Patchface is a water white.
Yes, yeah. He is a what I think that has been confirmed by George in that interview.
Okay. Oh, I didn't realise that.
So.
Okay. He mentioned that there was an interview where he talks about Beric Dondarrion being a
yes, fire white. That's right.
Yeah.
Maybe he doesn't confirm it. Maybe I just made that
Which then makes you think of what about the other elements and what about the you know.
This is what I was going to actually say, that you have the prologue of a Game of Thrones starts with an ice white.
Yes.
And potentially in this prologue we have a water white, a stone white in Shireen potentially, and potentially a fire white in Melisandre, because we're not really sure what's going on with her.
Yeah. Well, he was dead when he died. His skin was cold and clammy. He was dead, and he was revived. He's these riddles and things that he's saying. Yes, we do need to pay attention to them, because it's not him who's saying it; it's whoever is controlling him as a white.
Okay.
So it's he could. This is somebody who, as a boy, in wherever it was he came from, was it Volantis they picked him up in, or wherever they picked him up in? Yeah, he was very talented, and he was described as being a boy who could do magic. So he had some kind of skill. And weren't they bringing him back for a different reason, to be like a companion for the sons, or for some reason? Certainly he wasn't originally going to be like the court jester,
because he has the tattoos on his face, and so he was definitely a slave.
I just think having that propensity already for this kind of magical, he had some sort of ability, then I think that he would be the perfect candidate to be more of a conduit for whatever whatever it was that reanimated him as a water white, whatever that force was, whether it's some kind of god or some sort of magical force, or again going back to this kind of elemental nature, kind of where the balance between ice and fire, all of that kind, that's where it comes from. He is a reanimated magical being that is communicating in his own way, from exactly the same way that Melisandre communicates her convictions of her religion. The night is dark and full of terrors, and all the things that she says is exactly the same as Patchface saying, "The shadows come to dance, my lord. The shadows come to stay." He's giving exactly the same message, but it's coming from whatever force has reanimated him. whether Mel is a fire white or whether she's just, again, another magical being that is an easier conduit.
Yeah.
I don't know, but all I know is that he had magical properties. He was dead and then he was alive, and now he speaks in riddles and he is creepy as shit. Why have they got him around their 10-year-old
Especially
daughter?
when you think, apart from what he's saying, the idea that this guy with a tattoo of green and red squares all over his face, like that would terrify me. Like, I don't know why she's having dreams about dragons.
Sunny Frank in the comments is saying that Patchface is definitely a water white because he was under the water for 3 days.
And he was naked when they found him.
Yeah, he died and he was reanimated. He's definitely a water white without question. So but what does that mean?
So do you think that a white is, their consciousness is not always their own then?
The only thing that we've got any kind of frame of reference to in the books is the others and the ice whites, effectively. That's what we're more... And Beric, yeah. That's what we're more familiar with. Beric, on more of an individual level, you get to know, you get to understand and observe that he is losing his mind, he's losing his memories, he's being taken over by something, but he's still able to function. I don't know whether that means physically he will just fade away.
But is that because he's been bought back so many times? Like, so every time he comes back, he loses another bit of himself.
Yeah.
I think because the reason I bring it up is because something I hadn't noticed before with R'hllor and the Lord of Light. Well, first of all, the idea that Maester Crescent finds out when he finds it disturbing the way she says God, not gods, because they all think gods. But she says God, and is this the only monotheistic religion? Maybe it's not, but she, at the end, when she tells Crescent, you still have time to pour out the wine, and he continues with his plan, she says, okay, as you will. In other words, there's free choice here. There's free will here. You can, as an individual, decide not to do this, which makes me think that R'hllor and that Lord of Light is way more individual focused than the other religions. So perhaps the fire whites are going to be very different to more hive-minded ice and potentially water whites as well, if you know what I mean. That I think the fire whites kind of retain... The reason I say this is because if Jon comes back as a fire white, what kind of character is he going to be? How much of Jon is going to be in there? I mean, his only... If we're going to get any Jon at all, it kind of has to be a fire white. So yeah, that's just what made me think of it. It just... and the idea that the red priests and priestesses, while they all serve the Lord of Light, they don't necessarily serve a religion, if that makes sense. Like, they don't necessarily... Like, they all seem to be acting alone. They might have a message to spread, but they all have their own... they all seem to have their own kind of agenda. Like Taurus and Melisandre. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're not all like the maesters all serving the Citadel kind of thing.
They seem to have different specialisms as well, don't they? Like, she seems to be able to sort of read whether it's a specialism or not. I mean, there's argument that, she's not that actually very good at it, but reading the messages in the flames, whereas Thoros is supposed to be... And again, he stumbled across this by accident, but the whole resurrection, that's his gig. So they seem to have different areas of specialisms, not necessarily what they studied for, but what they've kind of just stumbled across or feel that they've got some kind of skill in. Mel gets it wrong all the time, and Thoros doesn't know what he's doing half the time. Which
makes me think that it is much more about the individual and free will, because there's no way you could have such a rogue element out there acting on behalf of your religion, because she is so dangerous and she's so bad. Even Taurus is rogue as well. So it's just one of those things that it kind of, just at the end with Crescent, I hadn't noticed before, as she says, as you will. It's like you're making this decision. Like it's not, there's nobody else involved. This is all you. But AU says, remember, she was a throwaway child. Are you referring to Melisandre? Because she was
Shireen, I think.
Shireen, a throwaway child.
Who did you mean, John? Shireen or Mel?
Because Mel is
Mel was a slave, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was a slave, and she had a horrible childhood. So perhaps this is where her and Stannis, this is where he finds empathy with her, and this is where they're kind of kindred spirits in a way. That's maybe one way in which she's able to turn his head. She knows how to speak to somebody who's had a less than ideal upbringing. Although he's still a member of the upper class, so he didn't have it that hard.
But it's like, how did she get in there so deep? And so she's got her feet right under the table there with a Dragonstone with Shireen.
She's unnaturally beautiful as well, isn't she? She's like, she sounds a bit like a siren almost, you know, like calling the dream. This, she's just red. She's just like, she embodies this. She embodies fire so much, and just this idea of passion and blood, and there's a lot of kind of, even though the word sex isn't used, there's definitely a lot of sexual overtones with her, and the ruby and everything. So yeah,
there's still a couple of things that I want to go through. I know we're labouring the point here with this prologue, but Davos we've not mentioned yet. I think that it's very pertinent to point out that Davos is described as being, as nobody could handle a ship at night better than Davos, and that whole throwback in the history to the Siege of Storm's End, which again was very descriptive, and it lasted an entire year. So we get some insight into how harsh that would have been and how welcome Davos would have been. You know, that whole thing, their interaction. But I do think it's interesting, again, to point out that I think there is something else there. I don't think it was just he travelled into, he smuggled some, I don't think it was just that he smuggled some onions into Storm's End. I think something else happened. And I think that potentially could have been a reason why his fingers got shortened, and also why Stannis wanted to keep him close. I think he smuggled potentially something else into this. This is all coming from MP, by the way, that potentially he smuggled something else into Storm's End, and that's why he's being described as nobody could handle a ship better than Davos. There's this big thing here about, and I think he smuggled onions into Storm's End is a bit of a cover-up for something that actually happened, because round about that time, children were being born and people were moving around to different places. So I think just, you know, bear that in mind.
Do you think Stannis knows that?
There's an interaction that comes up later, I don't know whether it's in this book or in the next book, between Davos and Stannis that makes you think, whoa, Davos seems to push things a little bit too much with Stannis, to the point where Stannis pulls him to one side and says, you can't talk to me like that in public, you know, you can't do that. But he's kind of, it's something that he has over Stannis, and I think it also, MP links it to Stannis's conversation that he has around who should I have been loyal to in that situation, my king or my brother? Who should I have been? You know, and the accepted notion is that he was loyal to his brother, and that's what happened. Whereas maybe the cover up is that that's not what happened. Stannis is very true and very loyal, and maybe because of this, again, deep rooted sibling rivalry, maybe he was actually loyal to the king, to the Mad King, and with that in mind, smuggling babies, you know, we'll get into it later, but that's the beginning of something to think about. And he never quite articulated it very well, but I remember having conversations with MP where he alluded
interesting
to, yeah.
And as Donkey says, onions have layers, and so do these stories.
Yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, that's really interesting, because often when reading Stannis's, or anything to do with Stannis, with the exception of the Wall and potential battles, perhaps going the Battle of Ice that we might see in the next book, if we ever see the next book, it's hard to know what the point is sometimes of that storyline. It's like we've already have a lot going on. It's like if Stannis's arc doesn't go anywhere, if it doesn't lead to the throne, then there has to be some other significance to
just bear in mind that the Baratheons and the Targaryens go way back. They go way back, and there are several incidents. Again, why I keep referring to World of Ice and Fire in this chat. There are several incidents, at least a couple that I can remember, where the Targaryen regent at the time was very close to a Baratheon. Like, they were, Baratheons and Targaryens go way back. And I think potentially we should bear that in mind when we think about Stannis and his loyalty. Who was he actually loyal to? Maybe we need to question that as we go forward.
And also the genetic impact of that as well, because it's not, you get the impression with Crescent that it's not just because he's an old man, it's because he's a maester that he's getting cut out. And maesters are notoriously anti-magic. And of course, if Baratheons have that Targ blood in them, they may have magical instincts. So that may also be a reason why Stannis is willing to, maybe a reason why he's willing to turn to Nell so easily. There's some kind of instinct that he isn't necessarily aware of, that he's drawing him to her. But I do like the way the old guard tend to be dying off, because we talked a lot about that, your Illuminati conspiracy in the last book. The other thing that I just wanted to mention here was the White Raven, and what do you think? Yes. We see a White Raven at the end of Dance. That's the last time. They're the only two times, right, that we see a White Raven?
Yes, yeah, and I was that's the only time I can remember. On this reread, it was like, we get a White Raven out of nowhere, and then there's another one later on that arrives in Winterfell. I thought that was interesting for me on a personal level, because I didn't remember that there were any White Ravens knocking around until the one that arrived in the chapter with Varys and Pycelle. They can speak. And this one
can speak. Yeah.
This one can speak, and it said lady and it said lord.
Yeah.
So that's all I got from that.
He seems surprised. Well, this is where dramatic irony comes into play, because he seems surprised at how much it can only say lady and lord. Mormont's Raven up at the wall is way more articulate. In comparison, and can say a lot more. So which makes me wonder, again, just that idea, especially when we go into Arya's chapter, which we will do now, that idea that the wall is that cut off from the rest of the world. Dragonstone is that cut off. Stannis is that cut off, that they don't even realize that the biggest birds you can probably get in this world, definitely, they're not. They have no idea of their capabilities.
Do you think, like, there's been, where we are at the moment, there's been a couple of magical events. There's been a birth of dragons, and there's also been the emergence of these magical creatures north of the wall. Do you think that might coincide with the ravens? Do you think that there's possibly, although it's not mentioned in the books, whether or not Mormont's Raven was a little bit more limited, and he gets more chattier as we go on? Maybe it's, I mean, Mel says later on that her magic is stronger at the wall, that kind of, there seems to be geographically certain areas where there's more of a pull for magic.
That would certainly make sense for Dragonstone.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting just to keep an eye on.
Yeah, because Dragonstone has to be a magical place.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we're expecting there to be a lot of dragonglass there that's going to be needed. But also you've got potentially 2 whites there. I mean, I'm not saying that Shireen died, but there's definitely something. I think we do see stone whites later, so you know, there's something there. I kind of feel something that the raven at the wall constantly says corn, all that kind of thing, and you have the idea there. You had a theory about that being a code of some sort. The thing is, though, and I'm not sure if it is mentioned. It is mentioned with Aemon, the last book. Ravens are meat eaters, and they will eat flesh. And I just wonder, is there a potential for them spreading some sort of disease? Is there a potential for them eating flesh of some sort later that's going to be important? Because it did come up in a Game of Thrones, and just that I couldn't get the idea out of my head with the blood and the fire and the red in this chapter. The idea of a white raven covered in blood. Just the idea that I don't know, there's definitely something with the ravens. But again, there are so many elements in
well, white and red is always kind of harks back to the weirwoods and that magic, and you see I mean, to be honest with you, I get confused between the difference between crows and ravens. Are they the same thing? I don't know.
No. Ravens are what the beef eaters. That's why they're called the ravens at the Tower of London. They're huge.
Yeah.
They're huge.
Yeah.
Really, really big. But yeah, I mean, they're probably 3 times the size of a crow.
Okay.
They're very, very big.
Yeah.
But I think the beef eaters, I think like that they got paid partly in beef, but I think a lot of this, they also get the name from feeding beef, I think, if I remember correctly, to the raven, but I'm not sure. But yeah, that's all I have to say about the prologue. And that was very long, but the prologue is very long. We're still shorter than the prologue.
Yes, just a couple of extra things. What did I want to say? This kind of comes up, I think, probably later on when we talk about Maester Luwin. But again, I think we're beginning to get the idea that this order of Maesters and the Citadel shun magic and superstition and omens. And later on, I've made a note that Luwin in particular seems to be very kind of anti-direwolf and anti sort of magical creatures and things like that. So that's setting the scene for us, I guess, that this order of Maesters are supposed to be anti-magic or seem to be anti-magic, which is interesting when we think about what their purpose is and why they're there and why they're so prevalent across in being able to influence the kind of highborn echelons of Westeros. But I think that, and the painted table being 50 foot long, which again just conjured, like, I was kind of thinking, hell, that's massive, that's huge, 50 foot, wow.
Yeah, that's the size of, actually, that's bigger than my, well, you've probably seen the video of my apartment. It's kind of open plan.
Yeah. I think it's bigger than the size of my house from one end to the other. Yeah.
Oh my God. I never thought about it. Is this going to be your number of for a Clash of Kings 50?
maybe.
It just occurred to me, the white raven that we see here, a Maester dies. And the next time we see a white raven in Dance, is that when Maester dies?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Oh, that's a bad omen then. Yeah, but no wonder they don't like seeing white ravens.
No. Okay, let's go into Arya, Horseface, Arya, and this is a very short and sweet chapter. And my first question for you, Claire Gray, why does he start with Arya? We can kind of make sense with now. why he starts with Bran. The whole series starts with Bran. Why does Clash of Kings start with Arya, do you think?
Well, I think that I think what he wants to do is very quickly set out what this is. You know these characters because you've been inside their heads in the previous book. We're now moving forward, and I have to set something out to you that tells you where this person is going to go, where there's what there's. I'm going to set some kind of story arc out for these characters. So I don't necessarily think it needed to be in any particular order, but I think the Stark children of Arya, Sansa, and Bran being in these first 4 chapters is important because that each of them very, very clearly sets out the story arc. The fact that this chapter in particular for Arya is her first experience of being a boy, being called well, no, actually it's not a first experience of being called a different name, because when she was even younger in Winterfell she was called different names, but this is this is her first experience of facelessness, you know, for want of a better word. And again with Sansa you get a sense of this is how there's lots of foreshadowing and lots of laying down a strong story arc foundation. Unless it was just Arya's, I think, one of his favourite characters to write. Maybe you just thought, I'm going to go straight in with.
Well, I know it's his wife's favourite character.
Yeah.
So maybe it was semi-dedication, but maybe it is just as you're saying that. Maybe it's about because she has to completely change her identity now.
Yeah.
Maybe it is introducing the idea that people are going to have to become somebody else or pretend to be other people throughout a Clash of Kings. As the kings clash, everybody else around them, like Sansa has to be somebody else. Bran does become other things and other people and creatures and all the rest. And then Tyrion, he's pretending to be the good brother, the supportive brother to Cersei when we get to his chapter. Unless you think Tyrion is a secret Stark. But I'm joking. But yeah, it is interesting that the first 3 chapters are Stark chapters. Or sorry, the three of the first 4 chapters are Stark chapters. And yeah, the big thing I took from this chapter, not so much about Arya herself, actually. It's about somebody else. It's about Gendry and the Night's Watch. First of all, that the Night's Watch is so desperate that they have to take criminals. Yoren is even too afraid to unchain all the way to the wall. Like, that's how desperate they are. I mean, it's horrific. But the big thing, and the thing that I didn't really think about until I reread it, is who brings Gendry to Yoren. I think it's Varys. I think that's the suggestion later, that it's Varys. He says it's a man that brings a boy and the message from somebody. So it's not, the suggestion is that the message isn't coming from the man himself. So if it is Varys that's bringing Gendry, it's not necessarily on his orders. That's something that I think I've heard theories about this, that Varys is trying to get rid of a Baratheon threat to Aegon, things like that. But
that would be feasible.
Yoren, the way Yoren puts it suggests that it isn't an order from Varys, and he knows him. So whatever disguise Varys is wearing, Yoren knows him. So he gets this message, that he's just to wait for Ned, to take Ned to the wall, and also take this boy with you. And the suggestion is later on, I think Varys suggests later on that's him, or there's some kind of suggestion. But my theory is that Cersei. Is that, sorry, was that what you were going to say?
No. Go on, carry on. This is interesting.
Yeah, my theory is that it's Cersei, that it suits Varys either way to take Gendry to the wall. I mean, we were talking about it here earlier on, and just wondering, how did Varys always know about Gendry? And probably he did. But I think it would be so unlike Cersei to use Varys, but at the same time, he is the master of whispers. She wouldn't trust Littlefinger with that job. And I think it would make sense. It would suit Varys both for himself, but also it would make sense for Cersei to send him to do that. And Cersei later on in Tyrion's chapter says that was the plan. She wanted to send, so she's almost confirming what Yoren said. Like the plan was that we would send we'd send Ned to the Wall, and we know that that's Varys's suggestion when he visits Ned as well, and Mormont wants it as well. But Varys suggests that. I think he suggests that to Ned, right, when he visits him in the cells. I believe he says something about going to the Wall. But
yeah.
I kind of think it seems to be Varys that's taken him. Yoren recognized him, so he obviously can see through the disguise, or else he says he before Arya even asks, he says, "I'm not going to tell you who. It doesn't matter who." Because if Arya knew it was Cersei, she'd go crazy. So I kind of feel, because I'm totally on the Gendry is the true son of Robert and Cersei. So that's my theory. But yeah.
That's you read that completely differently to how I read it.
So you're probably right.
No, that's really interesting, especially because I completely agree with you that Gendry is Cersei and Robert's child. I think that was kind of confirmed in one of the chapters that we looked at in the last book. But I think when you asked that question about who sent him, why was Gendry sent to the Wall, I think that this goes back to Ned. This goes back to Ned visiting him. Again, Varys had spies everywhere, so it wouldn't surprise me if he knew that Ned visited the Smiths where Gendry was, and if everybody knew anyway that Gendry was one of Robert's bastards, and it was just kind of an open secret between people like Littlefinger and Varys, and this was discovered by Stannis and Jon Arryn, and then more recently it was discovered by Ned, then there's a great big question mark over Gendry's head about whether or not he would survive much longer in Flea Bottom, in King's Landing, whatever. So I think that Ned would have had a conversation with Yoren, because we know that he did, about taking men for the Black Cells before he got his head chopped off. Ned had a conversation with Yoren, and maybe during that conversation he said, I know somebody who would do wonderfully at the Wall, but needs to get out of King's Landing just for safety. So it could have been heard about that or knew about that, and somehow selflessly decided that he wanted to fulfill Ned's wishes.
Sorry, you cut out there. That Varys heard about that?
That Varys knew that maybe he overheard, maybe his little birds came back and said this was the conversation between Yoren and Ned. I know I'm reaching here because we don't know that they had that conversation, but we know that Yoren had a conversation with Ned. This information could have gone back to Varys, and Varys could have selflessly decided, let's get this young man out of here because he's in danger, and I'm carrying out the wishes that the last wishes, if you like, of Ned Stark. So it could be something like that.
I think, you see,
but I'm really interested. That's made me think now about what you've said about Cersei.
So here's my thing as well. Why do they keep Varys around? Especially because he worked with Aegon, right? So I'm always wondering, why do they keep him around? They see the Lannisters seem to collude more with Littlefinger than Varys, so there must be a reason why he's kept around. And for me, the best reason to keep him around is if he has something on them, kind of like what you're saying about Davos with Stannis. If there's some sort of cover up, because it's definitely a man that drops Gendry. That's what he says. A man drops him off. That's all he knows, but it was a well-dressed man. So that is something that either Varys could do in disguise or hinge. for Cersei or Jaime, and like that big a secret is enough for them to keep him around. Contact they have with him, the less suspicion there is, the less collusion they have with Varys, the less this, but they need to keep him around. They need to keep an eye on him. So it would make sense that if Cersei is still trying to protect Gendry, and by the way, like everybody knows how we're going to find out later on. Everybody knows how dangerous King's Landing is at this stage.
Yeah.
And she knows how bad the city is getting. So just to remove Gendry out of the city, so he doesn't bloody starve to death. Let alone be killed
exactly.
In the
he certainly can't get a square meal.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that she even has that much compassion. It could be just that she doesn't want him found out, but can't bring herself to kill him. AU says not only drops him off, but also pays a high apprenticeship. That has to come from the Red Keep. Somebody in the Red Keep. I think that's the only reason to keep Varys around, is because he has a huge dirt on Cersei and Jaime. Huge.
I like that. That's interesting, and it just feeds into that. It was obvious to me in that chapter that I can't remember exactly what the words were, and I haven't got my notebook with me, but it was of course Gendry is Robert and Cersei's, but she just rejected him because it was Robert's.
You know, Varys doesn't do things unless they serve him. It's not financial.
No, he wouldn't do something selflessly like that just for Ned.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. And there's no one left from Ned's household to have done it.
No,
unless
certainly not well dressed.
But nobody else is left. So I think it is Varys. I think he alludes to it later, in the series. I can't remember where though. But yeah, just reading it again, it just instantly going, I wonder, is that Cersei? Is that Cersei? Because the way Yoren says it, the only reason he does it, you have to do that on a royal order. You have to wait for the head of the hand. You have to wait for the hand of the king. Is going to be carted back. Like, he's not going to trust anybody. He's not going to just say, oh yeah, okay, what, the hand of the king, yeah, okay, fine, okay, bye. Like, that has to be a royal order, I feel. Or at least put to him as a royal order. Right? So
interesting.
So that it's really Gendry, and just the that's the thing that I really focused on, and the Night's Watch, and the beating that she gets from Yoren. I forgot about the blood, pretty savage beating, but Yoren doesn't take pleasure in it. And I mean, you have to kind of put yourself in the mindset of a medieval kind of punishment for children. That idea of switching a child is pretty, it's only in the last 100 years, not even 100 years, not even like 50 or 60 years that's just not on. But you kind of feel like Arya doesn't resent him for it. She kind of had to be disciplined, and she had to be kind of checked for what she'd done, and just to kind of wake her up a bit. But also, you get the feeling with Sansa in the next chapter, the beatings she's getting, that's real pain. Like, that's really unjustified. It's proper abuse that Sansa's going through in the next chapter. It contrasts completely with Arya. Even though the description might be more graphic with Arya, you get the impression that Sansa's is just horrendous and ongoing.
Thereabout.
And yes,
carry on. It's just every time you when you make a point that I'm like, oh
sorry. No, go ahead.
No, because otherwise I'll forget. When you said that, Yoren definitely sort of takes her down a peg or two and puts her in a place. Of Jon and Arya parallels in this chapter, in this Arya chapter, and I think I've said that Yoren's fighting with Lomi and Hot Pie, Donald Nye's response to Jon. He's like, he was beating the boys with his like castle forged steel, and they've not even picked up sticks to fight before, and he really kind of embarrassed him and said, know your place, this is where you're at, and this, you can't just sort of about putting them in the place. but also still being that kind of, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that Yoren, but being a kind of kindly, some sort of support system for them, like John up at the wall, Donald Nye in the you know, the Smith, the one-armed Smith, and Yoren, which is why later on, you know, it's quite sad with what happens to Yoren. But I also, there's something in here about yes, you're foreshadowing, obviously, when Yoren says someone will kill Joffrey, but not you or me.
Yeah. And you can see the beginnings of the list.
Yes, you can. You can definitely see. Again, it's setting out this story arc for Arya beautifully. The facelessness, the being a different, you know, being a boy, the different names and pseudonyms and things. I think somebody counted once, by the end of where she's at currently in the books, she's had like 15 plus different pseudonyms. And that's possibly even before she became, you know, it was always, that's where a story was going, and we that as readers when we sort of followed her down that road. But the other thing that I've got here, and the only other thing really I've got for this chapter, is we are, again, it's this notion of being guided as readers and picking up different seeds the author wants us to see, and what he's trying to kind of circumnavigate with this very clever way of doing point of views. Because in one of Sansa's last chapters, linking it back to Game of Thrones, there was that her experience of being horrified about what had happened to her father, and she was, and in that chapter we both observed that she didn't say anything about Arya. She hadn't mentioned a sister, whereas in this chapter about Sansa. And it's almost like saying, as readers, Arya, good character, Sansa, bad character. You know, it's kind of feeding us because it's coming from particular point of views. So again, I think it's very, very clever. It's very clever the way he does that. It's very clever, because that's where the shock value is going to come in later on, and I'm sure of it.
But I think as well, though, they respond in different ways. So like, when Yoren switches her, I think that's what they call it, isn't it? When he reprimands her violently, that is,
yes.
And I like your comparison with John, because intellectually Arya is too immature to take on a lesson, unless it's through violence, and that is going to be a dominating part of her arc throughout. Like that she changes through violence. She responds to violence and to physical things, whereas that's different to, it's not different. Sansa definitely responds to violence as well, but if anything, it's the intellectual abuse, the mental abuse that changes Sansa. And it's a really interesting contrast, because right now Arya still has a very black and white view of morality, but Sansa is already having to mature very quickly.
Yes, she's, and there are examples of how Sansa's thinking very quickly on her feet.
Yeah.
Arya, and there's much more, and she is more of a tomboy. They are very different.
Absolutely.
Young girls. But I think go on, sorry. Sansa.
Sorry, no. Sansa is definitely in the middle when it comes to that kind of moral, I guess, that moral learning curve, and that the people around her trying to discipline her or mold her into a certain image. Like Arya is very lucky that she's with Yoren. She was lucky she had Syrio Forel. She is lucky when she gets those interactions with Roose and the Hound later on. She learns a lot as she's moving through this. And she's lucky that she has those men in her life to give her some sort of discipline. But then on the extreme end, when we get to Bran and you see Rickon, he has nobody. There's nobody there checking him. There's nobody there helping him mold any kind of morality. The more I read anything to do with Rickon, the more worried I get about where his character is going to end up. And if you look at the Stannis, Renly, Robert scenario and how those different siblings were just like polar opposites, it's worrying to see where, and I've said this before, Rickon is the only Stark sibling that we're missing a POV from. So it worries me as to where his character will end up without any kind of discipline or moral guidance,
well,
good or ill.
Like one of the Baratheon brothers, there's so many parallels here. What you've got is Crescent observing on how he failed to basically bring up 3 boys to be like, you know, upstanding citizens, because he couldn't. He was the Maester and that was his position. He was a father figure, not a father. And exactly the same with Lewin. Now, right now, he's in a position where he's got these children that are, where the parents, one died and one's buggered off somewhere doing her own plans of whatever she's doing, Catelyn. But he's in this position, and we can see how crap he is at dealing with Rickon and how terrible he is at dealing with Bran's, you know, and all this kind of. He's not. So it's almost like, you know, you can see what's going to happen here without this parental influence.
Yeah.
And I just thought it's very just as what me think about the lessons between the 2 Meisters that are in these, you know, Crescent and Lewin, that are in these chapters. But just going back to Arya, and the last thing that I've got for this really is, isn't it, we just very comfortably accept that Arya already recognises herself as a killer. She's quite comfortable with that.
Yeah.
You know, she thinks about it and she thinks about people finding out or what people might think. But in terms of her actually taking somebody's life as a young girl when she escaped from Winterfell, she looks at the 3 monsters that are from the Black Cells that are in this kind of locked up and shackled up in this crate, and she just, her first immediate thought is that, you know, she sees herself as a killer too.
But how could she?
There's this.
How can you not move? I don't know if you've watched Mindhunter on Netflix, but like just that idea that is just such a defining part of your identity once you do it.
But she's not. She doesn't seem like guilty or horrified or traumatized by it. It's just she seems to have accepted, and so do we as readers. And again, beautifully setting up Arya's arc as she recognizes herself as a killer. She's a 9-year-old girl.
And she's in the company of men and boys who are. That is, you know. You need to be hard, like Hot Pie. I completely forgot about Hot Pie kicking a guy to death.
Yes. Well, yeah.
Did that happen? I'm not sure Hot Pie. I don't think that's what happens when you kick somebody to death. But
still, just being around people talking about that as you know, it's I
guess the only other thing I have here is. It ends with her. When we mentioned Gendry calling the comet a red sword, but it ends with her dreaming, and wishing that she didn't have to go to Winterfell first, that she could just go straight to the wall to Jon. So it's already setting up the fact that home is not Winterfell for Arya.
Yeah.
Home is where people are.
Yeah.
And that's different to a lot of the other Starks. So it's already pretty sad.
It's quite sort of lone wolf already.
But again, the idea that like we got an information dump through Crescent, like for Dragonstone and everything. But here we get quite a lot as well, you know, with the comet, with Gendry. With the Night's Watch, there's quite a lot to read into even Arya's chapter. And then we go into Sansa 1. Now, I think, if I remember correctly, it was like a third the way through a Game of Thrones before we got anything from Sansa. And here she's getting the first chapter. And I would like to, I don't know if we know what chapter 1 of Winds of Winter would be. I wouldn't be surprised if it's an Elaine chapter. Because I think we're getting, even now, we're getting like the primary characters moving forward from the clash. Sansa, Arya, Tyrion, Bran, they're all still alive. So, yeah. Anyway, yeah, so Sansa 1.
So this is Joffrey's name day, and we start to get a little bit more closer. We've got more of a spotlight on these characters that have been mentioned before, and we've seen through point of views that are kind of further back. But you've got Sansa in direct, close proximity to Joffrey here, so we get a lot more sense of through Sansa's eyes, and why wouldn't she think he was evil after what had happened? In that, you know, we need to feel sorry for Joffrey, but again, just bearing in mind that sort of point of view, the fact that Sansa reflects on how different things are from this tourney to the last tourney, and that just again very strongly sets up her story arc for this is the difference, Sansa, between what you thought in Game of Thrones, then this momentous thing happened where your father got beheaded, and suddenly you kind of wake up a little bit. So the feeling of revulsion that she has for Joffrey, and again, just talking about what we said before, when it's kind of like she's very, very good at keeping her impulses in check, because we're in her head, so we know what she's thinking. And we know what she's really thinking when she says things like my beloved, and you know, we know what she's thinking, but sometimes she's not 100%. She's still a child, and sometimes she just cannot help it. And this is one of those occasions where she says you can't, when Joffrey wants to kill Sedontos for being drunk, and she immediately conjures up this excuse of you can't do that because it's unlucky on your name day, and the Hound steps in and saves her again. But so she does make those impulsive mistakes, but she's very good when she does that at kind of backtracking and quick thinking and managing to sort of get Joffrey to look at something else and not notice that I've just made this huge mistake and revealed how I really feel about you, which is absolute abhorrent hatred.
She's the best of the Stark children at learning to control that wolf blood.
Yeah, but it does, it just kind of seeps out from time to time, but when it does, again, she's got a handle on it the majority of the time so far. But again, just to get, you know, setting up the story arc for Sansa really well at the beginning of this book, foreshadowing again the fact that she wonders if her mother and Robb will be next when it comes to Joffrey's insane ramblings and plans. I'm just going through the notes that I've made here for this chapter. Tommen, her relationship with Joffrey's siblings, and we get a flash of Tommen here, just as we get a flash of Rickon in Bran's chapter. But Tommen and the straw man, and I've just made a note here. Tommen is underlined the quintessential straw man in this story. So the fact that it was Tommen versus the straw man, I thought was quite amusing. And then really I've just ended off this chapter by saying that it's you know, it made me smile in a way that how Sansa was kind of, she's thinking already, and she's thinking on her feet, but she seems to be like confused by Tyrion's kindness and affection for Tommen and Marcella. So she's trying to figure out, is he an exception to the Lannister rule, or is he just very good at covering up? You know, is he just a different type of evil? So it's interesting that she's trying to figure that out, and that's really all I've got.
It is interesting how she thinks just before Tyrion shows up, her last thought is she wished that Tommen was the oldest because she'd marry him.
Yeah.
And then Tyrion shows up.
Yeah.
So it is nice little bit of foreshadowing there. I should say, I don't know if I said it when we did it Game of Thrones. Sansa is my #1 pick to get the Iron Throne in the end.
Okay.
I think that's where we're being led. George R. R. Martin has said that he regrets, or it saddens him, that people don't like Sansa. I do like Sansa, and I'm not saying she'll get the Iron Throne because she's my favorite character or anything like that. I just think for me, that's the most logical place. My #2 pick is Gendry. But I don't think it's going to be. I think it's going to be one of those characters, kind of an outsider. I don't know if it's going to be Jon or Dany. I really don't think it's going to be Jon at this stage. But yeah, I don't have a huge amount. I think it's interesting. He starts off with, I mean, the contrast between this. I think the tourney was her second chapter in a Game of Thrones, the Hound's tourney. And the contrast between that tourney and this tourney, and the fact that it opens with Oakheart bringing her to the tourney or whatever, and yet later he has to hit her, right? This idea that her entire world has come crashing down. Like, Arya is still getting to be the tomboy she always was, but Sansa's world is destroyed. Her world is completely crushed. Bran and Rickon still get to be in Winterfell. I don't like. Rob still has his mom. John's world is a bit different, but he still has his pack of brothers. He had a pack of brothers in Winterfell, has a pack of brothers. I think of all of them, Sansa, for me, she's psychologically the most interesting, because of the destruction of her world in the first book that hasn't been repaired. By the time we get to the dance, it hasn't been repaired, and I don't think it'll ever be repaired. And a lot of that goes back, we talked about it last time, the death of Lady is huge. Is it really instrumental there? And perhaps that's helping her control that wolf's blood a little bit more, because she doesn't have her wolf around. Something that I hadn't really noticed the last time, that the Hound doesn't punish her. Obviously, I noticed that he hadn't, that everybody else does, but the Hound doesn't. And I wonder, is Joffrey too afraid to ask the Hound to do that because he knows the Hound won't? I think the Hound already refused.
I think the Hound has either been putting out such strong vibes to Joffrey, like, don't even ask me, that's not happening, or he's actually taken him to one side and said, not me. You can ask that whatever, but not me. I'm not. That's it. There must be.
There's something.
There must be a reason for it. Yeah.
It's also it's interesting to me that they can see the comet now. So, and they call it the dragon's tail, and they call it the color because the colors of the Lannisters, all that kind of thing. And so it's all to do with Joffrey. But interesting, the comet means the dragons are born. We are now caught up with Dany. Before, the timelines were very much out of sync in a Game of Thrones, but now we've caught up with Dany's time. And yet they're only finding out now that Viserys is dead. So information is moving very slowly. And that's probably because Jorah is not giving information anymore now that Robert is dead. But yeah, just that was something I noticed. What was I going to say there? Oh yeah, ironically, Sansa feels safer when Cersei is around, which is kind of worrying. And the idea that what am I saying now in my notes here? Oh yeah, Tyrion shows up and gives his sympathy to Joffrey for losing his father, and his sympathy to Sansa for losing their father. And Joffrey says, "What? Why? Why do you feel sorry?" And he's like, "Your father died." And he's like, "Oh yes. Like, it's totally like if you were unsure at the end of a Game of Thrones what kind of character Joffrey was, if you thought there was any kind of reason to him deciding that Ned should be killed, this shows you he's a complete sociopath. Like, he doesn't care. Like,
I think it would. I think he'd have the same reaction if it was his mother who'd been killed as well. Yeah. I don't think he cares.
No, No, he's total. It, with the exception of the Mountain, I don't think there's a full-blown psychopathic, sociopathic.
No, there's nothing endearing about him.
No, I think he's well up there with the Mountain. Like there are very few characters that are that bad, and Joffrey's definitely one of them. And I just loved the bit where Tommen is begging to go and fight the straw man, and Joffrey's like, "Oh, that's something for children," and Marcella said, "Yeah, we are children."
Yeah.
Thanks for reminding the reader that most of these are like, children that we're dealing with. Because, Arya, Sansa, Bran, they're all children. And then we get to the biggest child of all, because of the way he behaves, Tyrion. This is a very... I get a lot of conflict from this chapter over Tyrion. He starts out so strong, and then Shay just completely turns his head. But there is this is my other thing the big thing that I want to talk to you about in Tyrion's chapter. But I will let you go first, because I think for me, Tyrion's chapter is about the three big relationships in his life at this stage: Cersei, Shay, and Varys. And they are the most. They have the most impact on his story, I feel.
Well, I've just got, so this is the chapter where Tyrion takes the position as hand, as instructed by his father. So he arrives in King's Landing, and he starts to immediately assert his authority, and he knows that he has to. We can see from this chapter that there's real potential here for Tyrion to be quite politically savvy. He seems to hold his own with people like Littlefinger. It feels as though he's drawing a line there in the sand, as if to say, look, we can have a laugh and a joke, but there's only so far you can take things with me. I'm not a pushover. And thank you. And we've also got to remember that Tyrion has been taken the piss out of all of his life. As much as he's been in a fairly closeted and privileged situation, he's had people calling him horrible names, and he's now thrust into this position where he's in a much wider limelight here. So he knows that this is going to be a problem for him, like physically, psychologically, all of the, this is a big deal for Tyrion. So he has to assert his authority straight away. He plays Cersei quite well, I think. Again, similar to how we get a closer look at Joffrey through Sansa's eyes in the previous chapter, we now get a closer look at Cersei as for the reader through Tyrion's eyes. And there's a few things here that are quite interesting if you try to take away the fact that we're seeing this through Tyrion's eyes. It's interesting that she does seem to take umbrage at Varys questioning the authenticity of Tywin's letter. She's like, of course it's genuine. And that kind of, it gives me the impression that maybe, she feels that, I can take my brother down, but nobody else can. So there's this, I know we've talked about this before, and we talked about this when we did the TV show episodes as well. It's kind of reflected in the TV show, but is there some sort of deep-rooted, very weird, messed up, but deep-rooted kind of affection or sympathy for Tyrion from Cersei? I don't know. I just think that the relationship between Tyrion and Cersei in this chapter is, again, it's setting things out. It's setting things out, and we've got to be mindful that we're seeing Cersei here. Again, not that I'm saying that she's a favourable character, but we're seeing her through Tyrion's eyes here.
Yeah, it's a very complex relationship. It's one of my favourite relationships, though, in the series, because you don't really know where either of them are coming from, and yeah, we talked a lot about that at the end of the last series on the TV show. The complexity of that relationship, I think there's, as we said, there's a major twist coming with that. Yeah, I've kind of made my notes based on the three main interactions that he has. It is interesting that we learn quite a lot through Cersei here for the first time. We learned that Sansa did go to her. We learned that she was going to send Ned to the wall, and we know that Tyrion knew about her and Jaime all along. So, which is kind of alluded to in the Game of Thrones, but still, it makes me wonder, apart from the Tysha situation with Tywin, did a lot of kind of Tyrion's sexual hang-ups come from the fact that he knew this about his brother and sister? So a lot of his promiscuity, does that come from the knowledge of this? He ends the chapter, just sticking with Cersei, he ends the chapter by saying to Shay that he's going to surprise Cersei by doing justice. And it made me wonder, who is he doing justice for? Is it for the city or for himself? I feel it's for himself. He as good as Tyrion can be, he's usually quite selfish. And I think going into the last two books, I think people are going to be surprised. I think Tyrion is going to get darker. I don't think he's going to get. I think George uses Tyrion as a way, because he's his favorite character. I think he uses Tyrion as a way of exploring the darker side of humanity in quite a charming person, if you know what I mean. He does say that he's on her side. He at least tries to win her over, or tell her what he thinks she needs to hear, even though probably neither of them believe that at that stage. Then with Varys. So what did you think of Varys and his riddle?
Well, just before we get to that, just going back to Tyrion and Cersei, you mentioned this before, Kat, but Cersei does seem to, because they're talking about what's happened, leading up to this point, all the shit show that's happened previously with Ned and everything, and Cersei does seem to regret what happened, which again makes me think, did they know each other more than we think? As you know, do you remember that? We talked about this when they had that encounter in the Godswood. Ned and Cersei, he calls for her and she turns up and she tries to seduce him and things like that. And it's the conversation that we had, and we said, there seems to be this thing where, did they know each other? Did they know each other a little bit more than we think they did? And the fact that Cersei does seem to regret what happened, that he died, and she's there's just something there. There's something that I picked up from that.
Which would also feed into my Gendry thing, because her sending Varys to Yoren is her way of saving Gendry and Ned.
And again, I thought it was quite comical the way they just set up these phony sort of boundaries with each other. You know, it's like, are we on the same page? Yes, we are. Will you report everything to me? Yes, I will. And knowing that, off page, in Tyrion's head, we know he's thinking, nope, I'll do everything. So you can see all this. We're getting a really good taste here of all the political shit that goes on in the Red Keep, and how Cersei has this elevated sense of herself as regent and the position that she's in, and Tyrion coming in as a bit of a novice, but also probably we're given to believe a little bit more clever than Cersei is at this point. And they do this back and forth where they kind of set these kind of phony boundaries out with each other. However, comically, between the two of them, these ridiculous siblings, they don't seem as clever as they both think they are. They haven't figured out that Arryn was murdered in order to that it was it feels like there's this murder mystery thing going on, and they're talking about, well, who killed Robert then? What happened? And it's all coming out. And they think they're so clever about what's happened, but they don't realise that the whole John Arryn thing was a complete setup.
Yeah.
And that's what it was that sparked the whole shit that they're in at the moment. That's what sparked the war. And that just made me laugh, because I thought, I think they are, and they have figured certain things out, and they are very sort of, well, certainly Tyrion is very observant in this chapter. He didn't figure that out. So
yeah,
you're not that clever.
It is the battle of the daddy issues. They both
Yes.
have major daddy issues, because
totally.
I mean,
yeah,
Cersei has every right to be pissed off. I mean, how dare Tywin think he can appoint Hand? She is the Queen Regent.
Yeah.
And also, why does she let him? Because he has a huge army. So they all have daddy issues, and also she wants to impress him, and he has daddy issues. But he does give her credit for at least trying. She seems to have a good handle of the city guard. She is preparing wildfire, which is already huge to her arc. And yet the people are starving, and Littlefinger has been allowed to impose a tax.
I'm just, again, I'm thinking she might have done good things. She might have, she's clearly, we can see that she's been strengthening the defences of King's Landing. There's the first mention of wildfire. But is this all because she's allowing herself to be influenced by Littlefinger? Because he seems to be, he's doing the rubbing 2 coins together and coming up with 5. But the big feature for me of Cersei's character is she thinks that she's got more control and that she's much cleverer than the reality of what that is. And it's not even like she pretends. She really believes that she has that power. She doesn't realize she's being played by people like Littlefinger. She just thinks she's that so self-involved of her own sense of self-importance and entitlement that she doesn't realize other people are underneath her, pushing her in a certain direction. So yes, she might have done some great things already and strengthened the defenses, but that wouldn't have been solely coming from her.
No, that's true.
It would have been, somebody else would have been in the background, and she's taking the credit, really believing that this is her idea.
I wonder how
she's hilarious.
I wonder how much is Littlefinger taken from that tax as well. I wonder how much is he skimming off the top for himself. But I want to talk about Varys's riddle. He says that the comet is, in the streets they call it the Red Messenger, which is kind of funny because it is a message depending on how you interpret it. But he leaves Tyrion and Shay with a riddle. So he's talked to Shay, and Tyrion shows up and he's talking to Shay, and that kind of unnerves Tyrion, I guess. But Varys leaves with this riddle. In a room sit 3 great men, a king, a priest, and a rich man with his gold. Between them stands a sellsword, a little man of common birth and no great mind. Each of the great ones bids him slay the other 2. Do it, say the king, for I am your lawful ruler. Do it, say the priest, for I command you in the name of the gods. Do it, say the rich man, and all this gold shall be yours. So tell me who lives and who dies. I mean, the answer to that is you go with the rich man, right? So I'm that if it's a sellsword. So this is a riddle that seems to be carrying a message for Tyrion in plain sight, which Tyrion kind of acknowledges when he's sleeping with Shay in a little bit. It certainly seems to have penetrated, but not enough. I think Varys is warning him off Shay and potentially Bronn. As Tywin's, and how Varys can read people so quickly is amazing. But I definitely think this is him trying to say to Tyrion, get rid of her. I've just had a short conversation with her, and I already know you need to get.
That's brilliant. Her. That's brilliant. I really like that. I'd completely. Do we get the answer to that? Does Tyrion come back in another chapter with an answer to that?
I don't know. I can't remember. I don't know.
It is a hidden message. It is a hidden message, and I
He
don't
does
think
say like that she's only sleeping with me because I'm rich, kind of. So he seems to have already figured out the answer. I mean, the answer is pretty obvious. Nobody's loyal to a king, and nobody's loyal to religion in this book. So
no. The hidden message, just to be clear, is basically what he's trying to say is this one, and possibly your number two, you know, Bronn, the sellsword, they're here because somebody's paid them, and I happen to know that it's Tywin that's paid. You know, it. Excuse me. Yeah, he's definitely trying. Yeah, I really like that. Yeah, that's exactly what that riddle is. Yeah,
because Varys,
that's
what
exactly what it
Varys
is.
and Littlefinger are great at is figuring out what your weakness is straight away.
Yeah,
they'll never let their own weakness be known, but that's how they're able to manipulate and collude, and that's how they're successful.
yeah.
And for Varys, it's Tyrion's first day. It's his first few hours. And he already got to Shay. He already knows this is a huge problem. And he's already saying to Tyrion, red flag, get her out of here. She is like, I mean, she is so whatever, like, I don't know if she's a nymphomaniac or whatever, but she gets turned on very easily. But she's she uses sex all the time to control him. I mean, it seems in hindsight such a red flag that she is.
She also seems to want to get into the Red Keep, and I don't think that's necessarily because of. You could say that we've got the benefit of hindsight on this one. Maybe she wants to get into the Red Keep because ultimately, and she knows eventually Tywin's going to be around, that, you know, she'll be there for him. And all this time, Tywin's like doing all this stuff in secret. His dad knew about it all along because, you know, it's. I think she's very dodgy.
Oh, very. But so is Bran.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my take on that riddle. That I think.
I like that. I like that. It's definitely a hidden message, but when you think about it, it's quite obvious, isn't it? Yeah, it's a warning.
The king and the priest aren't the answer. That's for sure. So especially because, you know, you've got Pycelle and Joffrey, neither of them are answers either. So yeah, that's all I took from the Tyrion chapter. The shocking thing is the state that King's Landing is in. The fact that the cooked rats look better than anything the butchers are selling, and that's dangerous. Sonny says Shay knows that Tyrion's money is really Tywin's money. Yeah, that's very true. And you know, I think the TV show manipulates you with Shay into thinking that she has genuine feelings for Tyrion, but I don't think she ever has. And I think Varys is showing us that she doesn't. But yeah, then we move into our last chapter. Bran won, which he was the first chapter in the series, and now he's here at chapter 4. And my big pick for the very last chapter in the series, I think, is going to be a Bran chapter if we ever get to it. My first note here is poor Rickon with an exclamation mark. It's hard not to get sidetracked with Rickon, I feel. But the big thing here for me is the Maester and what is Maester Luwin doing. And Osha is very suspicious of him. Osha says he has forgotten truths, as if there's some sort of hive mind knowledge that all men have of truths that are integral to life in this realm. Being in touch with magic, being in touch with nature, something like that. So she's suggesting that he has forgotten it, like that he has been untaught this through his Maester learning. But my big question with Luwin is he poisoning Bran? Or is he feeding Bran a potion that is designed to stop him from giving into magic?
If he is, it didn't work. It's not strong enough, and clearly wolf dreams and magic are more powerful than whatever sleep potion that Lewin's been slipping.
It's not working on Bran, but is it working on Rickon? Because the only reason I ask this is it would make sense that the Maesters would have the power to control certain kind of, because they'd have to know about green sight.
Yeah, almost like an antidote to wolf dreams.
Yeah, that they'd have, but that Bran is so unique that it
didn't work. Well, yeah, because we know that Rickon has experience of dreams because of the you know, they both ended up in the crypts after Ned had died. So maybe he is kind of slipping them both a bit of sort of some weird anti-Citadel, anti-magic kind of serum or something.
Rickon has moments where he's more pliable, or more what's the word, accommodating. He's friendlier. So even though Shaggy Dog gets locked up because he has bitten one of the Frey boys, Rickon loves hanging out with them still for the most part. So there's something that's making him a little bit more under control. I don't know, maybe it's Ritalin or something. Some form of Ritalin.
Well,
I don't
know. I've actually made the only real note that I've made of Rickon is maybe Rickon isn't as stupid and reckless as we think he is, because but was it kind of strategic, this friendship that he made with the Freys, because it then allowed him to be it then allowed him to have, like, you know, unfettered access to the wolves, because that was the only thing that was stopping it before, was one of the Freys was scared shitless, but then he seemed to be able, so he's only what, 4 or 5 at the moment in the story, Rickon. He's very small, but maybe he's a little bit more savvy than in his wild way than we think he is.
You'd have to be to play the most boring game in the world.
Oh yeah.
It's the Lord of the Crossing. Sounds
Mayhaps.
like shite. So boring. Like, they're so obsessed with, like, who controls the tower.
I think the only thing that I got from that is, because for me, this whole Bran's chapter is foreshadowing all the way through this, but foreshadowing for things that we will eventually, you know, that we do find out, like, and so therefore it's setting out a very strong story arc here for Bran. He feels restricted in Winterfell, so and not just physically restricted in that he can't move his legs anymore. He feels restricted in the environment that he's in. He feels that he's got this connection to the wolves. There's something, he feels almost like there's something that he's kind of, he feels as though he should remember something that he's forgotten, some sort of language or something. So to me, that, you know, just there's several times here in this chapter that I'd never really noticed before, where Bran says things with real certainty and conviction, but he doesn't quite know why he said it. You know, like when he says, trees dream, they do. He said it with certainty, and that's like, this is foreshadowing that Bran is going to be this type of character. So we can see from Arya's chapter, oh, you're going to be this type of character. You've already acknowledged and feel okay about the fact that you're a killer. Okay, Sansa's going to be this type of character. It's going to be a lot of with Sansa, and lots of kind of playing behind the scenes, and with Bran, we can see that this is going to be much bigger than the location he's in at the moment. There's going to be lots of traveling, and that he's going to embark on this kind of magical, ethereal type of, that's Dark Child, and that's their story arc, and that's how we're going to be going forward with it. Just the fact that you've got characters like Osha, who's got that connection to, and she can bring it in. You've got old Nan, you've got all of the, you know, who immediately just says it's dragons without a, you know, she's
after
brilliant.
We go through everybody else's theories.
And
all dragons, just dragons. And the readers go, who is dragons?
Yeah, like without, you know, she doesn't even skip a beat. It's just dragons. That's it. No question.
And also that he also mentions within the same paragraph that she calls him boy. It's Dragon's boy, and she never calls him prince. And again, you know, feeding into that idea that he is a boy, and he's kind of a bit of a snotty little boy here at times throughout this chapter. But just what you were saying there about Bran wanting to escape, it's not. It's just like this chapter opens with him saying he preferred the hard, cold stone of the window than his feathered bed and blankets. Like this idea that he is already physically and mentally preparing to leave the creature comforts of man behind. Like he is already, you know, he's, what does he say at the end of the chapter? If he doesn't answer the thing that's calling him, he'll die. Like he has to. It's like it's almost like it's otherworldly, whatever it is.
He's constantly trying to communicate with something, whether it's the wolves, whether it's the three-eyed crow, whether it's, you know, there's just this pull that he feels that he has. And again, does that come from him? Is it been implanted by somebody? Is this all part of a bigger game, if you like, and Bran's being moved around the board by somebody?
It must be intoxicating, like sex with Shay is intoxicating for Tyrion. It allows him to forget that he's a dwarf for when he's with her. It must be intoxicating the wolf dreams. It allows Bran to forget that he's this broken kid, that he can't play even the worst game in the world. He can't play, like he doesn't get ignored. When he's a wolf, he's just a wolf, and he can you know, experience the world. What he calls the true world that's calling him.
So he talks about being a wolf. So this wolf dream, it's this lucid dreaming again, isn't it? He knows within the dream that he's dreaming. And I don't know what I don't know actually, because I'm like, oh, my notes have just finished and I'm sure there's more to this chapter. But I've just got some notes here on how the wolves relate to the children quite closely. So Shaggy Dog seems to be the one that's just constantly searching, never finding, and that's kind of similar to Rickon in a way. He's searching for his parents, he never finds them. It's quite sad. He's going crazy, and and Summer seems to be observing Shaggy Dog doing the same thing. But Summer, who effectively is Bran in the dream, they have this connection in the dream. Again, Summer feeling restricted and feeling that, you know, that this need to roam and go outside of Winterfell, and kind of that's where, you know, so the story arc is going to be. But I haven't really got anything. I'm just trying to think of
no, there was I had two questions. Well, apart from is Lewin has given him some sort of potion that's not working. So what is that potion? But the other two questions I have: why are the wolves howling? Because they're only supposed to howl when they're mourning. And he also does Bran actually know that's Jaime? Because he talks about wanting to be off exploring, and he specifically mentions he wants to kill Jaime Lannister, which I felt like, why Jaime? Why not Joffrey? Why not like Cersei? Like why? Like I know Jaime, but Jaime didn't kill Ned necessarily. He named him, but he says he wants to kill Jaime Lannister, and I was like, that's very specific.
Did he? I must have missed that.
Yeah, he says, gosh, I'm probably not going to be able to find it now. I'll try and find it. But he says that he wants to be off with Robb fighting and killing Jaime Lannister at one stage.
Yeah, maybe there is something there. There's definitely, because I mean, wasn't it in the previous dream that he had where he was falling and he could see a man with golden hair?
Yes.
There's something,
yeah.
you know, all of these things are planted in there, aren't they? So I think this is one of those kind of subconscious things. He knows that there's something not right with Jaime Lannister.
Yeah, I'm sure he does. Am I misremembering that? Because I'm sure he does.
It probably, because there's a couple of things that I've got towards. I don't know. Maybe I just stopped making notes, but
yeah. Sorry, he doesn't say Jaime's name. He says, I'd smell where they'd go and save them, and when Robb went to battle, I'd fight beside him like Grey Wind. I'd tear out the Kingslayer's throat with my teeth.
Right.
Rip.
Right.
And then the war would be over.
Right.
So something with him and Jaime, the war will be over. He, in his head, now it's a child's head, but still, he has this instinct that killing Jaime is important for the war to be over. I don't know why, but yeah.
Interesting.
It seems to go beyond, but it would have to do with the truth being accepted by the majority of people, that I guess Joffrey, Marcella, and Tommen aren't the rightful heirs or something, maybe. But yeah, because that's the knowledge that we need, not that Jaime tried to kill him. It's the knowledge of what Jaime was doing when he tried to kill Bran.
Yeah. I mean, there's a potential for Bran to know absolutely everything, you know, particularly at this stage in the books where we're at, where he's tapping into the weirwoods and it's like the weir net and he can go spinning back in time and things. So he's got the potential to be in different places and know different things, and through the trees be able to look at the histories and things. So but maybe he has that knowledge. Maybe that knowledge is there for him, but it's just something that's maybe just not that significant.
As I said with Bran in the show, and this isn't a spoiler because if you've read up to the end of Dance, you know what Bran is he's going to be capable of. I think Bran is the internet.
Yeah.
But unless without a Google or a Yahoo, other search engines are available, he doesn't know where to look.
Yes.
That seems to be the impression we're getting in the show.
Yeah.
And I would guess that's.
Yeah.
I mean, Bloodraven, the three-eyed crow, whatever you want to call him, he took his position when he was already quite old, like when he already had the wisdom of an adult man, and he already knew a lot about the world of men and knew a lot about the figures in that game. Bran won't have that. He'll be very young. He still has a child's perspective of the world. Like, even the fact that, you know, he thinks killing Jaime is going to end the war. I mean, it's gone beyond that now. I mean, that has nothing to do with Renly and Stannis' war.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe Stannis's, but definitely not Renly's. So, like, I think Bran's knowledge, while it will be very far-reaching, there'll be
it's limited. It's like he stood in front of a huge library.
Yeah.
But he doesn't know what he's supposed to be looking for, and even if he did know, he wouldn't know where to find it.
Yeah. Or it could be the opposite. It could be like if you've ever seen Bruce Almighty and Jim Carrey when people start praying to him and suddenly he's just like overwhelmed.
Yes.
With all of this stuff coming with him. So
yeah,
he could either be lost or broken, like, or else he'll need somebody around him. Like old Nan, maybe.
But I think there may be maybe you just, you know, it's there, the knowledge is there, he's able to tap into it, and maybe he does that when he has the wolf dreams. So this thing of, oh yeah, by the way, if you want to know who pushed you out of the window, it was this guy. Oh right, okay, that means I've got some kind of slight resentment towards the Kingslayer now, and in my childish notion, getting rid of him will, you know, pay him back for the horrible thing that he did to me, and also it'll end the war, yay. But I think that information, the knowledge and facts, if you like, are floating around there, and subconsciously they come in through the dreams. But it's like, that's not. If the three-eyed crow was stood in front of him, or the three-eyed raven was stood in front of him, he would say, knowing that knowledge isn't important for you right now, though, that's not the journey that you know. That's like the kind of everyday world that doesn't really concern you anymore, because this is now your journey.
Yeah, and that's what I said a lot in the Game of Thrones, that Bran's journey is about the abandonment of his ego, and the idea that he doesn't even want any creature comforts anymore. Is all about that. You know, he's not, the true world is separate from who he is, from him as Bran Stark. That it's separate from, you know, well, that's the way it's being presented to him.
It's kind of almost similar in a way. You could argue it's similar to the process that Arya goes through as the what's your name? No one. So it's this deconstruction of your.
Well, her true world is always calling. Like, her true world is just darkness.
Yeah.
Whereas Bran, it seems that it's going to be different. Even when she's getting beaten, she's thinking of being a wolf and the sigil and all that kind of thing. But Bran right now, again, I think, like we started off with Arya today talking about identity and Sansa's identity and how that's changing, and Tyrion, his identity as a Lannister and the Hand, and we're kind of ending with Bran's identity being very much up in the air for him, or at least very restricted or confined in some way for him. And then in the background of all that, who are these other people and what is their true motivations? So, like with Lewin, like, who is he serving? That's my big question with Lewin, because he is not Crescent, that's for sure. I don't think he's the same sense of loyalty to Bran.
What happened to the previous Maester at Winterfell? Because Lewin hasn't always been there.
No. But this is my question. Do you have to take a Maester? Like, do you have to have one in your castle? Is it the dumb thing?
It's recognised as being, it's all, you know, the Maester is attached to the particular, necessarily that family. They're attached to the castle rather than the family. So that's why later on Maester Lewin is there to kind of try and help and support people like Theon and things like that.
So
attached to the.
But you can't. So the Maesters mustn't want, the Citadel mustn't want families to have somebody from their own family go away and train and come back. It's kind of like, that's what happens with the guards in Ireland. If you're from Dublin, then you're not supposed to serve as a guard in Dublin.
Right.
You're supposed to go to another county. That was, I think that was the way it used to be anyway. So that seems to be true with the as well, that like you don't have Lewin Stark. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have, like, they seem to come from somewhere else. And that seems to me to suggest that the Citadel wants the loyalty to be to them first.
Yeah.
Like this idea that Samuel is going to go off, train with them and go back to the wall. I mean, how often does that happen? Like, why wouldn't every family send one of their sons to the Citadel to come back? I mean, that happens with Oberyn, right? Oberyn Martell.
He trained. But he left, didn't he? He started to train and then left.
But would the idea...
He forged a couple of links.
Yeah, would the idea be that he goes back then and serves in Dorne? Because maybe that's why he left, because that's not what's going to happen. You're not going to get to go back to Dorne.
Maybe he realised that, and that's why he left.
Because we don't. Yeah, you don't. Well, also we don't get the names often, like the full name of the Maester, right? Like, is Lewin his surname or his family name or his first name?
I'm just trying to think of other. Well, it must be his.
Like, Samuel
Crescent is.
Maester Aemon is Maester Aemon. He's not Maester Targaryen, you know. The Lewin must be their like Christian name, their first name. Cresson must be his first name.
Well, then you've got is it Pylos, who's like Cresson's underling? That sounds like a first name.
Because we don't have a house Pylos or a house Cresson or a house Lewin.
I think it's just their first. Don't they drop their house names?
That's what I mean. They drop their house name. So how? Yeah.
So you don't know where they're from. You don't know where they're from. It makes them. It makes them
anonymous. And I wonder, are they not allowed to tell you? Because that would have been. You could never imagine Oberyn Martell dropping the Martell.
There's something weird about the Citadel, the Maesters, and the Hightowers. Full stop. There's something. What we're told up to now as readers is that the Citadel appears to be anti-magic, and the Maesters seem to be very crucial key components of houses and castles. So there's a very clever and interesting way where they're not just foisted upon you, they actually bring with them skills around ravenry. So they open up your communication, they can help you with medical issues and childbirth, so they can help you with your actual family, raising your family. They can, what else can they do? They are kind of scientists.
Well, they seem to serve, like, on whether your house is going to go to war or not. They seem to serve as political and military council as well.
Yes, yeah, definitely council. So they're just. I'm just trying to think of.
They've put themselves in a position where they're indispensable, where you can't really operate a large house without them.
Yes, very cleverly done, and it's almost it's taken for granted by everybody. Apart from, I mean, isn't there even? It's the same with the scepters, though. Similar kind of thing. Like there's a scepter, there's a scepter at Winterfell still.
Shale.
Yeah.
Who also says the comet is a sword.
Yeah, yeah. Isn't there also a scepter or a maester on the Iron Island? I'm getting confused now.
Sonny says Lewin left Winterfell and went with Cat to Riverrun because he was there at Rob's
That's
birth.
That's right. Thank you, Sonny. You've just completely brought back that memory. He was the maester at Riverrun.
That's right, yeah.
Lewin was the maester at Riverrun, and he went back to Winterfell with Cat after she had the baby. So who was the previous maester at Winterfell?
What happened to him?
And what happened to him? Where did he go?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we're assuming there was a maester. There may not have been.
Yeah.
Cat bought her religion to.
I'm going to Google it. I'm going to Google it while we're talking because
Cat bought the faith of the Seven to Winterfell. Who's to say there was a maester there before? The only other people in the book that I think just go by their first names are the Red priests and priestess. Taurus, Melisandre. We don't know their family names either. So there seems to be. We shouldn't trust anyone that doesn't reveal who their family name, what it is, because that's huge. Like, where you come from and what your family are. I mean, it defines you if you're a bastard, it defines you if you're lowborn, it defines you if you're highborn, and everything in between. So the fact that they renounce that and are willing to do so, I mean, we know we pretty much know what the agenda is of someone like Taurus or Melisandre. They're there to serve a religion, but what are the Maesters there to serve? That's the biggest question. And we definitely haven't got a decent answer to that yet. They are as hive-minded as the Whites almost. Like they operate often with a hive mind, unless it's someone like Cresson and Pycelle, who seem to be very selfish in how they act. But Lewin, to me, seems like he's your quintessential, like he's operating by the book on behalf of the Citadel.
Yeah.
He's like, he should be like our standard bearer for what a maester should be.
But I don't trust him.
No.
You just kind of don't know what they're up to at the moment, and they're in such key positions of power. I can't find anything in terms of history about who. I know that there was a Maester at Winterfell before Lewin.
Okay.
I just can't remember who and what his name was. But if there is anyone watching this who knows, please do. Yeah. So that's it really.
Yeah, that's it for me too. There's a lot of questions about maesters. It's good. A nice start though. I feel like there's I'm gonna be watching Gendry like a hawk.
Yes.
And now Davos and Stannis. Now that with your theory, I'll be watching that too. But
the conversation between them and the dynamics between them, is there anything more that we can take from it? Is there any double meaning? I think that'd be interesting.
I'm doubly excited because we have our first Davos chapter next week. So we're reading to the end of Davos 1. And we have another Arya chapter very quickly. Very quickly.
Yeah, the next chapter is Arya, actually.
Yeah, it's like she's taking over Mini Ned. She's taken over in this book. All right, so thank you so much, Claire. And thanks to everybody else. Same time next week. We'll be reading to the end of Davos 1. If you're looking for the schedule for the entire for our entire discussion, it's in the description box below. There's only one date that I can't do a Sunday, and Claire has kindly agreed to change it to a Friday. It's February the 9th, but everything is in the description box. And I will set up all the events pretty soon. Hopefully, I'll get a chance during the week. But thank you so much, Claire. And thanks to everybody for watching and for joining us.
See you next week.
See you next week, everybody. Bye.
Bye.